If you ever concern yourself with whether or not you're reverse pivoting or how your body's turning, getting stuck on the right foot, a lot of that comes back to whether or not your body's turning in a centered fashion. And today we're going to look at a couple of checkpoints that you can monitor to ensure that your body does turn in a centered fashion. It's going to help a whole lot of other things in your golf swing as well. So let's have a look at the components that make up a centered pivot. So first of all, it starts with setup. So many players I see, when they do set themselves up at address, as they lean their upper bodies too far away from the target. Now, especially with driver. So when you do set yourself up with your spine relatively vertical. I say relatively, which means it's not perfectly vertical, with the exception of chipping and pitching and putting. Every other shot, your spine will be leaning very, very slightly away from the target. Now, mostly that's because you've got one hand lower on the grip than the other. So for a right-handed golfer, that's your right elbow's going to be bent, left is reasonably straight. That automatically puts those two things, my hand being lower and my elbow being bent, automatically means that my upper body's going to lean away from the target. I don't want to add anything more to that. And the reason why I don't want to add any more is that as soon as I start to add more and start to turn my body's likely to drift, especially my upper body's likely to drift away from the target, and it's really, really common. If I'm standing completely vertically and rotate, then my body movement is perfectly centered. Of course, I can't do that in the golf swing, but we want to work sort of more toward that principle. So when I set myself up and turn back in a nice centered fashion, here are the key components that I can look at to check that I'm doing that. So first of all, if I watch my lower body's turning and my right leg has remained pretty much in exactly the same position it was to start with. I'll sort of qualify this a little bit. There might be a slight shift away from the target with my right leg during the backswing, but at the end of the backswing, or by the end of the backswing, it will have moved back to center. So there might be a tiny little bit of a shift and then come back to center. So it's that tiny little shift that's actually going to help me to get pressure forward in the downswing. So again, just focusing on lower body. So I'm turning back. I might have a very, very slight pressure shift to about this point in the backswing. Movement of my body away from the target. I'll definitely have pressure shift. And then from here, I'm moving back and now I'm centered. And of course, when I swing down, it's easy to keep going. So that's sort of lower body movement. When I look at my upper body movement, when I swing back, again, I want to keep my body relatively steady. So I can monitor that, and the most common way of monitoring that's through your head. So as I go back and feel like I'm keeping my head steady, one really good thought is that as I go back, I almost feel like my chest is facing up a little bit. Now, if my upper body's leaning too far across and I turn back, you can see now my chest is actually facing more toward the ground. So when I set myself up, I want to have the feeling that my chest is almost up. Now, I'm not going to exaggerate that. If I do that, then of course I'm getting, that's one way of describing what a reverse pivot is. My body actually leaning toward the target. Now, when you do it correctly, particularly if you have been moving too far away, you might feel like you've got a little bit of this lean. But again, if you're watching your shadow, the sun's out this morning, so if I'm turning around facing my shadow, I can use that as my guide. If I haven't got my shadow, I can watch my reflection in a window or a mirror or something like that. So if we sort of put it all together, when I set myself up and turn back, or set up, my body's quite vertical, I'm turning back, my hips might feel like they've moved a tiny little bit to the right, but then by the time I get to the end of the backswing, they've recentered, and then I can move down. And so you can see that from here, my body is moving in a very centered fashion as I go back and through. Now, practicing that movement, or movements, even if you need to separate out what's happening with lower body and upper body, you find that by doing that, monitoring it, you'll find that it's actually going to be pretty easy to get pressure shifting on your feet and also to contact the ground in exactly the right spot every time.